All right, everybody, and welcome to Theory Underground. I'm David McCarricker, and today we are joined by Elton LK of the Working Class Intelligentsia podcast, as well as a DSA podcast called Class. He's also a local organizer in Boise for the Dead Parrots Philosophical Society, and he has been the co-instructor of the PMC Consciousness and Ideology course at Theory Underground over the last couple of months. And sort of as a celebration to commemorate the completion of that course, as well as the entire playlist that is now available on YouTube, so people are able to watch that free of charge. We are today joined by one of the authors of one of the essential texts to the entire PMC discourse theory or mode of analysis, and that is Dr. Catherine Liu. Welcome, 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 welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
It's an honor. Thank you for coming.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
I kind of just gave a little bit of an introduction, but starting with Catherine, I wonder if you'd like to say a couple things about your background, and what you're working on right now.
Sure. I'm Catherine Liu. I was born in Taiwan, and my family immigrated to the United States, started out in Flushing, New York, then we moved up to Mount Vernon, and then further up Westchester, following a little bit of white flight. My father worked at the UN. My mother never completed high school, and I have an aunt who's a member of the Hotel Workers Union who worked at the Four Seasons her whole life. And both my grandmothers were functionally illiterate. So I am, if I was going to school today, I'd be like first gen. But I wanted to just give a little bit of background because I think it's important to understand like how my book and what I wrote really resonated with a lot of people who are sort of who really were first generation professional managerial class people who came out of backgrounds where they had very little social and cultural capital. And part of the autobiographical aspect of this book is that I wanted to write about both my illusions about what it was to be part of like a liberal majority and my deep disillusionment with it as I've grown older and sort of moved through the professions. But I feel like I was always a committed Marxist. I don't know why, but from very young. And the trends were against me. And also my parents came from very autocratic families and political situations. So the idea was always like, keep your politics to yourself because that's the way you are safe. And I played that game and I was safe for a long time. I talked to my mother recently. She was like, don't get involved in stuff. Don't say everything you feel. And I was like, oh, great. This is where I got my fear from. But part of, I think, my commitments to class politics has to do with my childhood of was visiting my family in the People's Republic of China in China when very few people went there. And I saw what happened there, and I was privy to a lot of the conversations that people were having about China as a place and politics and Marxism from very early age. So that's kind of the background I'd like to just share with you all, because I think we're going to talk about a couple of those things, I think, today.
Absolutely.
Shall I go? Yeah. So I'll take this opportunity to throw out some interesting factoids about myself. So on my mom's side, she was adopted. She didn't know until she was 30 years old. So it was kind of, there was some jokes about it because her dad was a cowboy and her mom was a Chinese lady from Portland. Her mom actually sang at a nightclub in San Francisco called Forbidden City, which is famous enough.
Your adoptive grandmother then, or her?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. And she even I think had a relationship an illicit relationship with Ronald Reagan and was connected to some other celebrities. She eventually went on tour with Bob Hope, right? With the singing to the forces. So there's some interesting stuff there. And then on my dad's side, he's, essentially there's several generations of linemen. So he's, part of unions there. I, grew up, eventually my dad, became entrepreneur. And so I worked for him as an electrician for a while, and then decided that I wanted to go into computers. So I went the IT route. And then, essentially like I moved towards Marx and socialism very slowly. Honestly, I'm like very careful with every intellectual step, but I've definitely spent some time in Marx in the more recent years. And I, Dave mentioned I'm in DSA and have a DSA podcast called Class, but also recently in the last couple of years started a podcast on Antonio Gramsci. And it was through Gramsci and studying Class that I stumbled upon Barbara Ehrenreich and the concept of the PMC. So that's why I'm here.
Well, thank you for the introductions, everybody. And just for folks joining for the first time, I guess I should say a couple of things. Right before we started the live call, Catherine had asked, where are you all at? And I was just beginning to answer the question, and then I was like, well, we got to start. So I'm in Aguascalientes, Mexico. I've been living here for the last few months as a way of forcing myself into Spanish language immersion, as well as a way to, just get new experiences, save money, right? Cutting costs. Right now, I was living where Elton is living right now in Boise. And Boise, Idaho might seem like the middle of nowhere, but it is sort of like one of these new California escape meccas. And so it is popping. It is going through radical, what they like to call gentrification is really, it's just the PMC is going there, right? And so it was unlivable. And I cannot start a project like Theory Underground at a place like that because it would require working full time. Last year, I was working at Amazon full time, night shift, 36 to 38 hours a week, 12-hour shifts. My elbow is currently still messed up from that job. And it paid all right for, compared to other jobs that I've had. It was not less safe than other jobs in various ways. It in a way, people villainize Amazon, but I'm looking at all that automation and thinking, that reduction in socially necessary labor time could be repurposed, right? And so in that sense, I definitely am a leftist, but also I think, for this course, I've been holding the title of post-left representative because my general position is one of skepticism towards the left. And so it was kind of styled as a course conversation between two people who almost went into teaching professional philosophy and decided not to, and have since then been involved with the DSA and other organizations, and Elton's still involved and I'm not. But Theory Underground is a place for people who are of the left and who might be disenchanted with it, as well as people who are never really sold on it, to be able to at least get a shared basis in the essential texts. And then that's the main thing I just kind of want to focus in on here as the lead-off question, essential texts. It seems to me like the main critics of using the term PMC at all, as well as just, thinking about class in ways that are more current, right, have never really demonstrated a basis in the essential texts. And so for us, the two lead-off essential texts were Barbara Ehrenreich and John Ehrenreich's first essay called The Professional Managerial Class, which is obviously authoritative for coining the term, But then also James Burnham's The Managerial Revolution, because for people who don't want to take it seriously and they are of the left, they will just scapegoat, strawman, ad hom the whole idea by just saying, oh, well, that's a Burnhamite idea. And so it's like, okay, well, if it's a Burnhamite idea, what's his idea? And then how does he agree or disagree with Aaron Wright? And then we go from there into more modern stuff. And then obviously we end the course with you and Angela Nagel. And so I'm just wondering, because you teach you teach a course on the PMC?
I taught a course called Class and Contradiction, because in the academic world, among, I'd say, like the cool kid Marxists, the PMC is something that people think they know and they dispose of. And the class that I taught last year, which was a graduate seminar, was really focused on Marx's chapter 10 of Capital, The Working Day, where Marx talks about the interests of the worker being in direct contradiction with the interests of the capitalist or the boss. And I really wanted to show like how this class relation, this class contradiction is absolutely different from the thing that they're used to talking about with academics. Difference. It's different from difference. And how different. So this is already getting very academic, but no, I don't teach it. I don't teach it. And I wonder why, but I feel like in a way I'm very protective of these ideas, and I want to have a wider audience for them. Professional, non-academic people have seemed to be much more enthusiastic, much more moved by the book, and I don't want to sit there and discuss, parse like meanings and words. So what I'm providing is sort of the background for the book. And part of that, I actually think is, and Elton, my trying to deal with why Lukács's History and Class Consciousness is read less than Gramsci. So I set up a bunch of debates within the class to sort of give my students the background with which to deal with what class is, what class struggle is, what contradiction is, and also why Gramsci's notion of hegemony is more popular among Western leftists than Lukács's notion of class. So that's what I do in these seminars. And what I do on podcasts, what I do in writing, I think is addressing a wider audience. And David, I don't know why I've done it this way. No one has asked me directly. Oh, yes, because I don't want to become like the expert on the PMC, like the professor of the PMC. I don't want to own it in that way. I don't want to be a specialist in that way. It's a polemical and political project. And within my profession, and you talked about this in one of your questions, is I believe in the integrity of my profession, which means not like trying to be cutting edge or branding myself, but I'm trying to give people like the intellectual history and ballast with which to be able to talk about the issue of class and then enact it in the kind of politics outside of academia. Everything that I do is critical of academia. So,
Right.
but I feel a deep, deep obligation and responsibility to my students. And, with my undergraduates, most of them have no idea what I do, but they love me, I love them, and we have a great conversation. And then, part of my practice, I think politically, is to establish trust with people before I give them the ideology critique. So
Perfect.
So you've made me articulate certain things that have to do with my, deep commitments and convictions. What I would really like to do is be able to teach outside of academia, but there doesn't seem to be a way. I can't. This is my day job. I got to do my day job, and I want to do my day job well.
Of
So the
course.
podcast, this kind of thing, gives me an opportunity to speak to a wider audience. A wider audience has been actually more receptive to the ideas. A lot of there's like a UC wide, Marxist study group. They didn't invite me. to do very much. They're doing a lot of stuff these days. And, they like, Joshua Clover and Charmaine Chua. I don't need to, call out them, but their ideas are just very different from mine. And if we had a forum, I would debate them, but it's not really what happens. And it's not really that productive because then in the end of the day, it's like no one's mind has changed. I'd rather strengthen people's resolve to fight the good fight and to find comrades and not have these like fights with colleagues about, the correct interpretation of Marx. But the PMC as a concept is really, really important to me. And I think it's really critical as a way of understanding history. And so can I jump in? There's one thing that I've been thinking about recently that I think is really important.
Absolutely.
I think it was Harry Braverman, or many Marxist historians have talked about the position of the manager or the clerk who manages the capital of the capitalist, right? Or manages the workers and the actual capital. And I think it was Braverman who said that in the 19th century firm, a lot of these types, these scribblers and clerks, they were considered family servants. And it's only and I think that is such a fascinating evolution. It's like you're of this manager or this expert who's taking on functions the capitalist doesn't want to do, because in early capitalism, like the capitalist is sort of still looking at his numbers, still managing his things, and then the function of the manager and the sort of financial analyst and things like that breaks out and becomes more specialized as capital becomes more complex, as labor itself and the fragmentation of labor needs more management. And we know that Taylorization produces a whole new level of engineering knowledge that we can think of today as IT work, as black box algorithms that manage workers as well. So you have a whole field of expertise that the family servant can't really manage anymore. But the function was originally like a family servant function. To people who say that this class doesn't exist or it's not important, I'm like, or Marx didn't talk about it. I was like, so capitalism hasn't changed since Marx was talking about capitalism,
right?
Because capitalism has become more complex. Industrial production has become more intensively managed, and we have this thing called higher education, which is an incredible sorting mechanism for promising social mobility, but also like credentializing and initiating people into these special functions that help the boss, help the capitalist manage his or her the means of production that he or she owns, the capital itself. So like the engineer is just, and the computer software engineer is like one very technocratic aspect of the PMC that plays a really important role. The other thing that I was going to say about this function is that in the 1980s, like actually, Piketty talks about how most wealth in the world, Thomas Piketty, in Capital in 21st century in Capital, most wealth is still inherited wealth. Like they're just invisible people with low shit tons of money. You don't see them. They're given money to foundations, NGOs. They're not out. They're not in your face, but their fortunes are so huge that they need people to manage it at every single level. And it's like astonishing because we always think about like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, but they're actually just the spear tip of the capitalist class. Like there's, especially in places, well, I shouldn't say it, all over the world, Piketty shows, like in Europe, in America, even in the People's Republic of China. It's incredible how like the elite families are still the elite families of the 20s and 30s. This is an incredible capital just reproduces itself through inheritance. But what I was going to say is there's like a crazy thing that happens in the 1980s with Reagan's reform. He's like almost a member of your family, Elton. With Reagan's tax reforms is that there's an opportunity finance capital because of deregulation, because of tax reform. And I was looking in this recent article that I wrote for Business Insider about philanthropy, university endowments, etc. A lot of hedge fund wealth is made in those years. People go to Ivy League schools, they get to manage Ivy League endowments. Like Tom Steyer, who ran for president, he went to Yale. He started Farallon Capital, and Farallon Capital got a third of its initial investment from the Yale endowment because David Swenson was looking, he was the Yale endowment manager, for a higher rate of return on this massive amount of money. And a lot of fortunes were made. BlackRock, Blackstone, these fortunes were, and countless other private equity hedge fund fortunes were made in the 80s. So we think, so these guys who are like Larry Fink, Steve Schwarzman, Tom Steyer, they think of themselves as like revolutionaries, explosive people, whoever, work hard. They went to, Wharton, Harvard Business School. Like they don't want to be trust fund kids, right? They don't want to think of themselves as capitalists. And because they specialize in finance and management, money management, there's this weird hybrid of professional managerial class, so socially mobile, economically mobile, educational, credential hoarding types who now like make $1 billion a year. Schwartzman's last paycheck was $1.4 billion, right? But he can say like, that's not my interest on my fortune. Like I made that money, right? He's going to be like, that's my salary. That's his fucking salary, guys. So
Jeez.
they don't feel so Schwarzman can think like I'm just a really smart guy because I made a lot of money. And that kind of capitalist PMC sort of specialist smart guy world, um, I feel like has been especially pernicious in academia because ever since Zuckerberg, ever since Jobs, ever since what's his name, Bill Gates, everyone feels like an education at Harvard or an education at Caltech or MIT should be converted into this kind of massive um, fortune building. And that somehow these people are just smart. Like they just had like really good ideas and they're not, fat, they're not like the fat robber baron of the Monopoly game, right? He was sitting around with a big cigar and his top hat, and his spats with gout. They're like dynamic because they got good grades. And so I just think about how higher education and capitalism, American higher education is one of our biggest exports still. It's an industry that not only produces credentials, but also because of its endowment and because of philanthropy has allowed for the accumulation of incredible pots of money in these elite universities that then need to be managed and converted often by their own alumni.
Right.
I'm sorry, that was a very, very long
No.
response
No,
to
it's
questions that you gave me, but
I I have a question on what you just said. So I think people probably know what philanthropy is, right? And so the idea is, at some place like Boise State University, a lot of philanthropy, quote unquote, is coming from places like Micron and Simplot, which are on the one side an agricultural billionaire family, and on the other side it's a software tech engineering family, and that philanthropy is incentivizing the university to restructure so as to train people who they can then pick off of. Oh, maybe we'll hire
yep.
this person, maybe we'll hire that person. But what is the endowment? Can you kind of go into how endowments work?
So every university, even public ones now, like Boise State and the UC, like to have a pot of money that they like to grow, and they like to attract donors to increase the amount of their endowment. So that so you wonder, like, they need to have this money because the state, UC in Boise State would say, like, the state is not funding us anymore. And it's a way of building a pot of money that we can use on a rainy day or help our students. Well, what actually happens with endowments like Yale's, like Harvard's, like Caltech's, like the big private endowments, and increasingly the UC, is that these are like hundreds of billions of dollars of endowment. They're the interest that you can earn on them could like help pay for everyone's tuition for years, but they never use it for that kind of money. They use it exactly for what you were saying, David. Endowments are used and donations are used to restructure the university, to repurpose education to serve industry, and to also play this like arms race thing where you build more facilities and fancy buildings that then make you more attractive to prospective students and elite students that then can be recruited away from you to become, captains of industry or software engineers or innovators. So there are these so Steve Eaton, and a lot of studies have been done because a philanthropist who gives something to a nonprofit, universities are supposed to be nonprofits, they get huge tax breaks. And people say that, analysts have been, Steve Eaton has said this, Charlie Eaton in Bankers in the Ivory Tower, and other economists have shown that the tax write-offs that they get cost public coffers more money than any kind of return that you might think the public receives in a university or nonprofit that they give to. The tax write-offs are huge, and part of the increase in tax write-offs during the Reagan era was, and you guys are too young to remember this, but Reagan was like, we can't trust the government to, the scariest words in the world are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Reagan said that. And so you have to make everything private. You have to privatize social services, you have to privatize pensions, you have to privatize utilities, you privatize educational functions. I don't know about Boise State, but the UC at the height of let's just say like in the 1980s, when things were already becoming very Reagan friendly, conservative friendly, the state was contributing $25,000 and $2016 for every student at the UC. Today, the state contributes $11,000. So where do you make up that rest of the money? Because it costs much more than that to educate a student. Tuition, you jack up tuition, and allegedly like philanthropy. But mostly it's out-of-state tuition. So a university endowment functions like a university savings account, and all of the interest that you earn on that has to be returned to the functions of the university, allegedly, right? But it has become an arms race right now. And, even within the world of higher education, there's a polarization between the elite universities who generate these incredible endowments, and then, everyone else who's just trying to catch up and suffering for it. But the whole idea of the endowment has like completely exceeded any kind of educational mission, and it's completely distorting the functions of the university, which were, in my view, like as a Marxist and who believes in like liberal education, should be like the humanities and social sciences, right? But those are forms of knowledge which can give you Marxist insight that are very dangerous, that are very difficult to convert into intellectual property or profit making. So philanthropy and endowments are headed more and more towards areas that can be monetized, like robotics, stem cell, AI, nanotechnologies, all forms of engineering. Like the university where I teach, medical school, because we're all aging, has just become so bloated on this one side, and then you have this other side that's starving. But it's originally the core function of a university was humanities and social sciences. I'm not saying like we're all angels in the humanities. I mean, I got plenty to say about like how we're failing our students. But the idea is that I think if you give people like historical knowledge and the tools to understand where we're coming from and why things are the way they are today, you have a more critical, more active, and kind of happier student body. Like my students are happy to be in my classes and to be learning. And I don't know if I can say that about pre-med students. Like they'll be happy when they're making $300,000 a year, in 12 years, but they're grinding right now. And this idea that you have this 4 years of time in your life when you're able to explore what you're interested in, be curious, like that just is like out the fucking window right now. Everyone is living with like all this anxiety about the future, but with in total ignorance of the past. So that's a very long answer to what is an endowment. Sorry.
This is why the PMC course that we just finished couples so well with the other course that just finished, which was just a group of us reading with 3 instructors doing weekly lectures on Carl Jasper's The Idea of the University, which is a positive critique of the institution by saying what is the ideal of this thing that obviously has a lot of problems, and he's writing right after the defeat of the Third Reich, and so the rebuilding of the German education system. He is dedicating this piece to one of the presidents of one of the universities, saying, this, have this in mind. And he's basically saying, like, we have on the one side, obviously, political tyranny that's going to try to silence disagreements, but on the other side, it's business, right? And it's been great. But one of the students in that course, actually no, Anne was one of the instructors of that course. Anne is in the chat right now, and she just said on the live chat, "Okay, now I need a book on higher education by Catherine Liu."
Oh my God. Well, you can say business. I've written over the years about this, but there's this Business Insider article. If you Google me, you'll find it. So, I could put it in our chat. Yeah. Let me finish this book on trauma first.
Yeah. Well, you share that with me. I'll share that with Anne. And then the other thing, just as a point of order, is this conversation was scheduled to go for another 20 minutes before we go to the private side, where you get to meet the students in the course, the ones who wanted to share with you their project proposals and ask you questions directly. And we can go a little bit over the time limit, but not too much. Is there? So before we close,
that's how university and colleges are turning into real estate hedge funds.
Oh, wonderful.
So that's the link.
Perfect. So with this last stretch of time, then, I want to give Elton an opportunity here to ask some of his questions, and then we'll wrap it all up by I'll give a quick overview of the playlist and the things that we talked about, so that people who are watching this have something that they can dive into, because I know a lot of workers who have listened to it binge it at work. They listen to all the lectures, and I've also done exegetical readings of the essential excerpts of the essential texts. So that means that I read I read the conclusion to your piece, and I contextualize it in the rest of your work. I did this with a lot of the pieces, so that people can binge it. Okay, Elton.
Yeah. Yep. So I have spent quite a bit of time in the John and Barbara Ehrenreich essays, and then of course we talked about that in this course. And I am curious, I guess, essentially, you seem to be, one of the people who's done the most to, kind of promote their concept of the PMC, and I'm curious what your history is with that concept and essentially how you discovered it.
I don't remember how I discovered it, to be perfectly honest, but I feel like I've always been reading it in some way. But I do have to say that one of the other people that I thought was really important for me was Harry Braverman, who wrote Labor and Monopoly Capital. And he was also a labor historian Marxist of the 1970s. And it might have been when I was reading a lot about Braverman, and I was really interested in Taylorism. And I was really fascinated. I was really, really, really into this notion of craft, like trying to figure out what craft labor was, what the labor aristocracy was. And I was really fascinated by this idea of de-skilling that Braverman talks about how on the assembly line, one of the most damaging things to workers is the sort of robbing a worker of her full intellectual understanding of the labor process and making it into a managerial specialization, right? And so the Iron Reister was right there with me thinking about these things, but they were writing a little bit later than he was. He was writing at a time when I think his book Labor Monopoly Capital came out when the new left was really vibrant, and so he was seen as the old left, right? So Barbara and John Eric talk about the ethos of the new left, and I was becoming more and more critical of the new left. And this also helped me understand why people like Braverman and Paul Sweezy were not being read, and why we were embracing Foucault's ideas of like prisons as places of power. What do you say? Schools, prisons, schools, and the church or something, but everything but the factory floor. Like that, I thought was really fascinating as I was reading through all of this stuff, and what the new left really turns to this notion of power rather than exploitation, right? And discipline rather than managerialism. And so there were a lot of questions that I had about that were really answered by the Erich essay, which was published like 5 years after Braverman's book. And they say, the new left has been completely taken over by college-educated workers and college-educated people who think that they are at the vanguard of social and historical change. And I see this total abandonment of like the analysis of politics through analysis of the labor process, right? And the other thing that I think, this is not like about like the first time I read it, I guess it's just a way of what else resonated with me when I was reading it, was my reading in Siegfried Kracauer, The Salaried Masses. I don't know if you know this book, but it's an incredible short sort of proto-ethnography of a new class of people. Krakauer said he was writing in Weimar, Germany, right? So there's the devastation of World War I. Berlin, though, becomes this like vibrant metropolis where you have like social democracy in play, but with the rise of Nazism sort of on the horizon. And Krakauer talks about this new category of people that he sees in the metropolis who are not paid by the hour or the piece, but who work in offices or department stores, like clerks' offices. And he says they make very little money. Like it's 20s, 30s Germany. Everyone is very poor, but these people think they're better than workers. And he does this dissection of their mental life. He interviews them. He walks around them as a member of the left intelligentsia. Sort of, he says he's taking us on a trip into like a whole unknown world, rather than like Franz Boas going to the Amazon or, Marcel Mauss going to the Northwest Pacific. He says there's a whole world that we don't understand that's in Berlin, and that he's exploring. And he discovered that among these people, like salespeople, managers, clerks, low-level clerks, they may make less money than the industrial worker, but they think they're better than the industrial worker because they have a salary. They're not paid by the hour. And so they identify with their work as a vocation. I was thinking, like, this is definitely like my class. This is like the white collar. This is what becomes white collar classes. And they identify with the interests of their bosses. and they look down on people who are paid by the hour. And he says, in order to reconcile like their low level of pay, but their higher sense of themselves, they are the most ideologically deluded class. They need the greatest entertainments and the greatest leisure time. They need to go out and lose themselves in a cinema and all of these like urban leisure activities because there's so much contradiction in their lives. And he makes this like he paints these like beautiful portraits of them. There's this one guy, a clerk at a large firm. I was like, these are people who work in a firm, right? They're not factory workers, they're not agricultural workers. These are like the traditional working class of Germany, right? They're not artisans because they can't really do anything with their hands, and they're not capitalists, that's for sure, right? But he says they are this new rising class in Germany. And many people say, looking back on Krakauer's work now, that he was writing ethnography of the people who would become Nazis.
Hmm.
The people who were the most ideologically susceptible. And so he was organizing. He was talking to this manager guy, and who was in charge of hiring and firing. So he was firing a lot of people. We call it downsizing now. And Krakauer asked him, so what if your boss came to you tomorrow and said that your job would be made redundant? He said, I would fire myself, of course, because that would mean it would be better for the firm. Like, it's just like that kind of individualism, the identification with the boss's interests, and also this like sense of superiority and a really like an ability to think about oneself as a worker is in direct, contradiction to the forms of solidarity that the left and the Communist Party was trying to form in Berlin at the time. And Krakauer eventually had to flee Germany and came to the United States and wrote some of the first film analyses. So I feel like Krakauer and then that left sociology, C. Wright Mills's White Collar, they lead up to Barbara and John Ehrenreich's professional managerial class for me. So I don't have an original moment when I can remember reading this. I just remember like all of these ideas just like were so important to me, and I didn't see them discussed in my intellectual world. And so someone said to me, like, isn't there recently, they were like, well, isn't there a possibility for a left intelligentsia? And I believe that Krakauer was a member of that Gramsci was a member of that intelligentsia, Latch was a member of that intelligentsia. And I feel like the notion of a left intelligentsia in our day now is really, really sad, like the actualization of that, partially because academia has so deeply institutionalized, streamlined, and curated and manicured the life of the mind for the purposes of the capitalist class, the donor class, and the oppressors, really. And that too is one of the reasons why in academic world now, so much of what we do is styled to please large donors. And in the humanities, one of the most powerful private institutions, nobody will dare say anything to them because you're supposed to, try to get a grant from them, is the Mellon Foundation.
Oh, am I interrupting? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I was gonna, that kind of touches on like, so the reason why I even asked that question of like how you were introduced to the original essay is because I was only recently introduced to it, of course, through the internet phenomenon of the PMC, and honestly felt a little bit betrayed that like, I had lived all of these years and had not heard of the essay.
I felt that too.
So insightful.
I felt that too, and I can't remember when. I think it was collected in one of these collections in my books back then. Nice. I was like riffing through this. I'm like, what is this? And yeah.
So in my like I mentioned that I do computers, but more precisely like process improvement. Essentially, Taylorism is my actual occupation. And
what does that mean?
Well, so essentially, like, for example, when you implement an IT system, some software, you're doing it because you're going to be streamlining a process theoretically, often it actually ends up making things more complicated, but that's a different topic. Which is to say that, I've put a lot of my thought into process improvement and what that means, how that affects the workers and of course the organization. And, the reality is that discipline has evolved a whole lot since Taylorism. Honestly, a lot of that change has happened because of labor organizing against the PMC. And so you see it even like in lean manufacturing is tied to Toyota, and Toyota like was explicitly saying, we need to make sure that the workers are happy so they don't go on strike, that kind of stuff. So now, and we don't need to talk about lean manufacturing. I will say that it's not what it gets talked about in the media in that it really is kind of like pro worker, but in a PMC kind of way. We need to, make sure that that the workers are happy. All of that being said, a lot of my interest, even in Marx, has been because he was also clued into these kinds of things. And then Gramsci, talks about Fordism and Taylorism and that kind of stuff. And where I was going with that is that specifically when I got into Gramsci, it's that he was talking about the intelligentsia, and I think that's true for lots of people why they start reading Gramsci. But he is talking about a working class intelligentsia, which is again the name of my podcast.
Right, that's right.
And essentially, that's kind of my next question. Pardon the long lead up to it, but essentially, that idea of a working class intelligentsia, Gramsci, he was starting to identify the PMC from what I've read, but he really didn't. He certainly didn't talk about it as a class. In fact, he specifically talks about intelligentsias being kind of committed to a ruling class or class, and so so you get an intelligentsia of the capitalist class, for example, or of the aristocracy, which is the church from the Middle Ages, and then you get the intelligentsia of the working class. And so I've really been trying to wrestle with where the PMC lands in that. And so I'm curious, essentially, what you think about that today, kind of like where can we have a working class intelligentsia, and where does the PMC, especially, us who are like fully in the PMC, how can we align with the working class?
Yeah. So you have this idea that, as I said, like the greater the division of labor, really is more and more starkly enacted in America today, right? You have people who are glorified as, symbolic analysts, I think was what they were called, or, elites, knowledge workers. And then you have the working class, the manual laborers, who are increasingly left behind, especially with regard to deindustrialization. And a lot of them end up thinking of themselves only as service workers, or, not another layer of non-productive labor. But every leftist of the 20th century believed that, every leftist worth salt believed that the great, insight, the revolutionary insights, the totalizing understanding of political economy had to come from the experience of the worker, married to the theory of the dialectics, right, of Marx. And I think I'm struggling to answer your question because I don't have a complete answer to this, but what Barbara John Ehrenreich show is that it was after the new left emerges at that the professional managerial class, if you think of them as a kind of a branch of the working class, because they're still salaried and they're not capitalists, they monopolize the idea of political progress in America. And so blue collar working class people are seen as left behind, are seen as reactionary, as the new left reconfigures itself and actually repudiates all socialist political economy for still being patriarchal or racist or normative, and that they see themselves as creating a vanguard form of life. And so you could see it, you could say, well, is this the intelligentsia of the working class, like become a vanguard, counterculture? Or is this the intelligentsia of a new managerialism that is completely in sync with the interests of capital? And so, you could think about like the hippie Stuart Brand actually becoming a Silicon Valley guru as someone who's like one of those transitional figures, because they want to. Stuart Brand's Whole Earth Catalog was a way of construing like new communalism as a new way of life for Americans that would not disrupt actual capitalism. We'd have communalism within capitalism. And anyone who wanted to disrupt any revolutionary thought that came out of like the working classes was actually seen as being like old school. Like there was going to be a new form of totalizing intelligence. And I think that this is what Braverman, also what Marx says at some point, is that what is stripped away from the worker, what needs to be restored to the worker, is a complete view of his or her work process. He or she is the expert of that process. And how can we have like worker managed processes that restore the dignity of holism to the worker, him or herself? And if you have a increasingly divided division of labor, a vicious division of labor that we have in the United States, where you have like smart people go to college and dumb people end up doing manual labor, then the media, the liberal professions all conspire to strip that like total picture away from the understanding of workers and their position in capitalism. I know that that's not a good answer, but so workers had fought for leisure time. There are working class intellectuals, working class politicians throughout the 20th century who wrested from their lives the time to read, the time to think, the time to talk, the things that you're talking about. But today, I would say, like the American working class, at least, is so beaten down by deindustrialization. And I was thinking a lot about, and this I'm just going to throw out there for now. Like, I feel like the fentanyl opioid crisis in deindustrializing America is a symptom of people being deprived of the sensuous immediacy of thinking, of art, of intellectual life. And to replace it, the drugs.
Yeah, that seems a very plausible assessment.
I have no empirical evidence yet, but I'm just going to throw that out there. This is like, I've been thinking this to myself, like walking around, driving around. So I'm just throwing this out there.
And Dave, do we have time for one more question, or where are we at?
It's 6:30 exactly.
Okay, we can wrap it up.
We basically have to close out. How about you say it so that we have a promise to return in the future, so we can actually
Great.
So what would it be?
I won't answer.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
We won't let you.
Perfect. Yeah, just as like the end of Fear of Falling when we talked about I think it was maybe in our final session of the PMC course I read, closing of Fear of Falling, and Barbara Ehrenreich, as I read it, is basically calling the what she's calling the professional middle class at that point is the universal class, and essentially is looking to remove the gatekeepers from the PMC And what that means is, I think like she's proposing something pretty bold that I don't even fully understand what it means, but it is just kind of like, well, what if the credentials were no longer the barrier for the working class to join the middle class?
I'm going to answer that very quickly and just say
Yeah.
that she feels that there are very valuable things in the professional middle classes that should become universally available to all workers.
It's perfect.
Well done.
And so the last thing that I'd promised to do before we close out here is to do a quick little screen share so that everybody can see what we've got on the screen. And I'm going to switch it over here to... All right, everybody should be able to see this now. This is obviously just Theory Underground, the channel. If you go to it, and I'll set up all of our faces here on the side so you can still see us. Okay, so when you go to Theory Underground just the YouTube channel, you can go to playlists right here, or you can just scroll down, and the first playlist currently featured, it won't always be the main one featured, but it's right here right now. PMC Consciousness and Ideology. As you can see, we're currently in a video that is on the top because I have this in newest to oldest for videos in this series. If you click the sort button and go to oldest, you can actually start at the beginning and then binge your way through the whole thing. One thing that I had meant to kind of say at the beginning was that people get the idea that the concept of the PMC is a social democratic idea or a socialist idea or a conservative idea. Anybody who doesn't want to think about it will say it's the bad guys, it's their idea. But the reason we structured the course the way that we did is we have social democrat, socialist, liberal, centrist, revolutionary, communist, and reformist socialists all represented throughout the 4 lecture sessions. And then there are also the exegetical reading sessions here. And so it doesn't really matter where you're coming from politically or what you're disenfranchised or disenchanted by with politics today. Like, people from across the spectrum are asking, what's wrong with my class analysis? Oh, how does this inform it? Okay, what's going on? And so if you want to have that understanding, and if you want to understand why PMC is not synonymous with petty bourgeois, is fundamentally different, in fact, then you have to binge this, or at least read the texts that are recommended for it. And so with that, everybody, thank you so much for joining. We're going to go to the private side. If you are in the class, if you've been in the course, hop into the Zoom call. I just sent out a brand new link to your email. You should be able to see it there. We'll see you on the private side. For the people who are still watching live, I'm going to roll the U.S. tour announcement, which is currently slightly out of date because we've added stops in some cities, such as Chicago and Pittsburgh this fall. But for right now, you'll see the older version of the U.S. tour advertisement, and you'll get the newer one soon. So anyway, take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
I'm going to be right back.
Okay, sounds good. We'll give everybody a chance to get in here.
Yeah, the same here. And
In an attempt to bring in new people to the world of philosophy and theory while building on relationships already established, we are doing a countrywide tour of the United States this fall.
What's up, guys? It's Ann and
Are we coming
Dave.
to a city or town near you? Do you think there is a venue or audience in your local region that would be interested in a lecture or facilitated discussion about existentialism, critiques of therapism, PMC ideology, self-help, introduction to philosophy, or the time-energy critique of any of those things? This speaking and discussion facilitation tour will include the Pacific Northwest in mid-August, the Kansas City, Missouri area late August or early September, Philadelphia at the beginning of October, and really we're going to be all over the area there, hopefully, so get in contact with us if you think that we should come visit your state. Phoenix, Arizona, mid-October. In SoCal, especially San Diego, late October. I say especially San Diego because we already have our guide for the San Diego region. What's the difference between a host, a guide, and a volunteer, you ask? Well, thanks for asking, actually. The volunteer role is for people who want to put up posters or in other ways promote the events that will be occurring in their town or city, whereas the host might have a guest bedroom, guest house, or a place that we can park our van so that we can sleep in our van. We need to know if you would have like bathroom facilities or anything like that, and so the form on the website is where you can tell us what you have to offer. Guiding, on the other hand, though, people who love to guide take a lot of pride in their local knowledge. A good example of that would be Michael Downs when I visited him in Raytown, Missouri, and he took me into Kansas City and we had barbecue, and he took me to the mall and to all these other landmark places from his life growing up there. But a more recent example would be my friend Michael in Poland, who took us around Katowice, Poland, and basically gives a historical and sociological analysis of everything, and it was amazing. It was one of the coolest things we've ever experienced, and it made us realize some people just want to provide the space and privacy, whereas other people want to take you out and show you around. And so if you're interested in being a volunteer, host, or guide, we have a special form for that, so please fill out your information and get in contact with us as soon as possible so we can fit you into the schedule, because we'll love to meet you, touch base with the local community. And if you don't think anyone else in your area is interested in the things that you're interested in, if you don't think anyone else is into this stuff, well, we might be able to surprise you.
When I saw that poster, Boulder Art in Boise, fucking Idaho, are you kidding me? It was virtually an answer to an unspoken prayer, really was. And I just couldn't believe that somebody was interested in the things that I was interested in, that I had been interested in for years and had kind of given up on in futility. I'd labored in solitude for so long. I had no one to talk to about it, no one to bounce ideas off.
This tour is going to bring together a lot of people who want to be based in Texas with the people they're in conversation with, and yeah, I think it's going to be a fantastic year. The only other thing that I want to say is that Michael Downs' first book is going to be published by Theory Underground really soon here. I've got another book coming out really soon here. These books will be spread throughout the United States on this tour, so I'm hoping to be able to do some actual book launch events at various bookstores. Outside of that, I guess the last thing that I would say is that Michael Downs is gearing up to teach For They Know Not What They Do by Slavoj Žižek. We're putting out all these introduction videos and other interviews related to the topic of Hegel, Lacan, Žižek, because we want to give people an accessible and sturdy basis in the discourse. The problem is that Michael Downs is very busy having to work at a wage slave job. And so if you want to help in freeing Mikey, make sure to go to his Patreon at patreon.com/thedangerousbaby and make a donation. Thank you. I would be remiss to close this out without a quick shout out to our patrons and our anonymous donors. Thank you so much for the donations already. We've only been around for a month. We already got over $3,000 in donations, and so thank you. And stay tuned for the app, which is on its way. There will be a Theory Underground app. So the current setup is that it is a social media site built around courses, where you can suppose that people who are involved in the discussions have a shared interest in the same or similar texts, and where you can assume in a lot of the discussions that, yeah, people have read the stuff that you're reading, that you're bringing into dialogue. And so, for instance, The Idea of the University by Carl Jaspers, dedicated for him. Slavoj Žižek's For They Know Not What They Do, dedicated for him. And then as people take the course over the years, new people will be coming into that forum. And so if you get in there early, you'll be able to see how the conversation evolves. And as new people add into the conversation, it'll bring back memories and like things that you want to work through, questions that you had with the first time that you read the text. And so I'm really excited for this. The reason I've built this website is because I think that this is what's lacking in so many other spaces, is that ability to return, to be able to communicate after the fact and in a sustained way on a platform that's not attention grabby and annoying like Discord. And so stay tuned, because there is an app on the way. Thank you to our donors. If you want to donate, go to theory-underground.com/support. Thank you.